Okay, so you've it's been a year. You graduated in 2024 and you're now getting full time into the workforce. So walk us through just quickly kind of how you manage just the initial, finding and getting into a role that you like.
Yeah, I think the initial stages was sort of accepting that, this was the full focus now because once your degree wraps up, you have those times where it's like, yeah, okay, we finished. But I think initially it was really trying to narrow down the search because there both is and isn't a lot out there.
Mm,
Um, and for me, as someone who'd finished a degree and had frankly no idea what they wanted to go into, it was that balance of keep your options open, but don't take something for the sake of taking something.
mm,
So I also realized how long it can take to get a job. I think it
mhm,
was something looking back I severely underestimated. I thought, within a month I'll have landed something. Um, that month became four for me. It was countless applications. It was spending sort of most of December and January really knowing that you're not going to hear. And purely just because of how the recruitment in a lot of industries work. And it was also then drawing back on the relationships. I was very fortunate to have colleagues and classmates of mine sort of reach out and say, "Hey, look, I know you've graduated. How's the job hunt going?" Getting that insight from them. But I was
mm,
very fortunate. It's how I've ended up in my current role of being referred for a lot of roles,
mm,
and it was never something I imagined actually worked. It was something you hear at the career expos and
mm,
on panels, but you sort of think, yeah, well, you'd have to be pretty lucky. And I stand by that. I was very, very lucky and very fortunate to have that. But that's sort of how I've ended up here was just keep applying, stay
mm.
on top of it. But you do have to be a bit realistic. I think it's one thing to be like, yeah, I've demonstrated this, but again, it goes back to what we touched on earlier of demonstrating something in a classroom can and usually is very different from demonstrating it in an active, ongoing environment such
Mm.
as a full-time job.
For your experience, going through the job seeking side of things and looking for different job roles, did you have to go through a lot of different interview processes?
Uh, yeah, so it was going through anything and everything I could think of because I,
Mm,
I also wanted to make sure it was a job I could get behind, not just one I could tolerate. So it was Seek, it was LinkedIn, which is everyone's favorite.
mm,
But it was also checking out, a lot of companies have their own portals, and a lot of the
mm,
time they're a lot more closely monitored than these platforms that advertise the jobs.
mm,
And then, as you touch on interview processes, I had a bunch. So some were sort of three steps before you actually got to the interview. So it was seeing the online assessments, the one-way interviews,
mm,
and that sort of thing. I don't think you ever really get used to just looking at yourself in a camera and talking. But then it was also you had group interviews, you had just a phone call. I had one job, and before you even got sort of cleared for an interview, you had two phone calls. One was just discussing you and the role, and the other was really honing in on the I'd say the logistics and the specifics of
mm,
it. And then it was also just the in-person ones. But the other thing I'll add to that is realizing how different the approaches are by different companies based on just what they're going for. Like some companies are quite casual. I remember showing up to the interview full suit because I thought that's what you do, even though it's February and it's 38 degrees, and they were quite shocked by that. And then you had others, and it was very sort of clean cut to the point. Walk in, I only talk if you're answered to, sort
mm.
of thing, and then yeah, going away.
Oh, very, very interesting. And you mentioned that the I think the role you landed, is that right? Was a referral?
Yeah, yeah.
So is that, going forward, do you think that or even for those listening, especially students listening, do you think that trying to get those types of referrals, building your network, for example, would that be more important than building your resume? Which one, how would you rank them, or how would you say that?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say they're pretty balanced, but I think what you've got to keep in mind is the authenticity and how genuine the relationships you're building actually are. Like
Mm,
as someone who attends and has hosted a number of networking events, it's very easy to be a network warrior,
mm,
and a LinkedIn warrior of just, oh, I'll add you on LinkedIn, and you walk away, you've got like 200 connections, and
mhm,
that's it. You never speak to them again. But I think the resume is always going to be a vital thing, because it's part of the process, right? Like they're going to review the
mm,
resume, but then if you've got a really genuine relationship with someone who's referring you, that's going to like boost what you've said.
mm,
Whereas if you're just relying on one and don't really have anyone
mm,
speaking to it, and vice versa. If you've got someone who can like speak really well to your character and your abilities, but your resume hasn't really been that developed, it's not going to be the assistance you're hoping for.
mm. Yeah, for sure, right. And how did you go with building your resume? Was there any um, any tricks that you focus on, or anything that you wanted to make sure was clear to those reading it?
I think it was for me, it was very much about balancing it with the LinkedIn because
Mm,
I once got it's one of the best pieces of career advice I've gotten was
mm,
your resume is one thing, but your LinkedIn is like the scrapbook that accompanies it. But
mm,
it was also making sure you actually had something to talk about in your interview because the first resume I wrote when I finished was like 3 pages. And I'm
mm,
like, yeah, I'm going, this is fantastic. And sent it off to some mentors and some colleagues I had, and they're like, no, this is ridiculous. Like everything you could share in an interview and those really key memories and achievements and stories are just already being
mm,
shared. So if they don't resonate with it on paper, they're not going to feel the need to bring you into a conversation about it. So for me, it was about, okay, let's keep it to 1 to 2 pages instead of 3 or 4, but making sure it's really just the key things that they're asking for, the company
mm,
demonstrates as well what's actually in the job description. Because then if you are successful, probably one of the next things they'll do is reach out to any references you have and start sort of, I'm not going to say stalking your LinkedIn, but
mm,
reviewing it and seeing if it's as up to par as your resume is. And then if you're fortunate enough and you're successful in both those, it not only invites the interview, but it makes it a lot more seamless because they're familiar with you, which means you're not sort of thinking, okay, well, I don't want to take too long to answer the question, but I want to tell them my whole life story about this specific thing they've asked me about
mm,
in a minute and a half. And it was something I found of, again, fortunate enough to be referred, but they'd still looked at my resume on my LinkedIn. And I remember walking in there straight off the bat, it was a very specific question about a leadership position I held during university last year. And it threw me off, not because I didn't know how to answer it, because it's something I thought I'd have to bring up because
mm,
they were so familiar because I developed both and kept them relatively succinct. It allowed that conversation to move forward, which also
mm,
meant the interview touched on a lot more about me and my qualifications, but also then allowed me room to sort of interview them as well and sort of be like,
mm,
okay, so why should I work here, sort of thing. So I think overall you want to be building both, but you don't want to be just giving the information away for the sake of giving the information away. If you feel it genuinely relates to what the job is and what the company is looking for, by all means, but you've also got to make sure it's recent and relevant. Don't
mm,
touch on, a leadership role you may have had in high school because by the time you graduate, that's 3, 4 plus years ago, and hard to see how that's carried across.
mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure, right. Now you, um, how long you been in this role now for?
Uh, just about 8 months now.
So 8 months. How's it been? Has it, getting used to the new, this new life? Has it taken a toll on you? You enjoyed it?
Yes, yes to both. Certainly enjoyed it. Lots of changes, good and bad. Nothing against you, Daniel, but I'm not missing the assignments, or the mismatched schedules and
I,
everything.
I,
But
I get it.
also takes a toll just because it is so different. Like whether you've worked full time before, like I'd done a full time placement, still threw me because it's a different ball game once you've graduated. Like you don't have that thing of, oh, I've still got a year of studies and everything that you don't realize is such a comfort. Certainly not something I realized throughout my placement. I was like, oh well, if I don't pick this up, I've still got next year when I finish my studies. And I'm sure yourself and all final year students will agree is your final year's never straightforward. But also just it was the little things of, you are at it 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month,
Mhm.
48 weeks a year. You get 4 weeks of annual leave. You've got sick leave that you don't really want to have to use because it's unpredictable when you actually need it. As well as just how you sustain yourself. I know for me, I'm very used to the longer uh, breaks in between semesters. Like between semester 1 and 2, it's 4 to 6 weeks. Between
Mm,
the end of the year and the start of the next year, it's can be up to 3 months. And going into knowing you've only got 20 days guaranteed that you can use if you need to, different ball game. But it was also just it was adjusting to the little things. Like you get used to what you do day to day for your job. You get used to, what's expected of you and what KPIs you might be expected to meet. But it was the things like, how do I actually get to work now? Because you spent 3 years getting to uni, you go from home to uni, uni to home. But it's also you walk in. I was one of 10 who started
mm,
in April this year, and so it took me like I'm no good with names, so it took me a while just to learn the other 9 people's names and my two trainers.
mm,
But then you sort of get out of the classroom, in my instance at least, and all these people in this company know who you are, and they're like, Noah, how you going? How you finding the job? And you don't know if you've met them and forgot, if you're meant to know them and you don't, or even if you work with them,
mm,
as well as just, you know, the different hours. Like uni, you usually find you've got a decent amount of flexibility
mm,
with your schedule. Like you've got set classes and hoping you're going to them, but it's very different going from, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or whatever shifts and times you may be working.
mm. And for those other nine that started with you or other friends you've had that graduated last year, is everyone doing well? Is there a lot of struggles? What's been your experience there?
I think in my case and the people that started with me, it's been great. And I'm not just saying that, I truly mean it because we're very blessed to have such a supportive culture,
Mm.
both in the company I'm at, but the team I'm at. So
Shout out to Zero, right?
yeah, shout out to Sarah if you want to give me a raise, that's fine. But no, like really fortunate. Like there's still areas, and part of that's just the nature of adjusting to full-time work. Part of it's the nature of the job, but
Mm,
I think we all found similar. So for me, I was straight out of uni. Some of them had a decent amount of work experience prior to this job. But we all sort of found your initial few weeks. I know for me, the first month really tired me out just because so much is happening. You're adjusting to something new. If you're like me, bad with names, that's a whole other thing. But looking back at it now, 8 months in, it's been really positive to just see how we were able to get behind each other and stay behind each other. But we really created that environment of, if you've got a question, whether it's related to a case you're working on or just adapting, just ask it. Because it's that common thing. I'm sure you've said it a lot as a teacher and lecturer of, you don't know who else has that same question. And when you're adjusting to something as major as full-time work, it's normal. It's a lot like starting uni. You get caught up in the excitement, and that's fantastic, and that's a really good thing. But you also realize you didn't know what to expect because it is brand new.